the journey home. Of all the themes human beings have ever wrapped into stories, perhaps none cuts deeper. Home, the word feels heavier than its size allows. It is shelter, yes, but it is also the place where memory, love, and identity root themselves. For thousands of years and across countless cultures, the longing to return has been one of the most potent forces in storytelling. We feel it in our bones when we hear of someone who has been far too long away, someone who has braved danger and temptation and the creeping fear of forgetting who they are. When Odysseus left the smoldering ruins of Troy, he thought he'd be home in a matter of weeks. The winds and gods had other plans. 10 years would pass before his feet touched Ithaca's soil again, years of storms, enchantments, monsters, and moments of dangerous rest. The Odyssey has lasted 3,000 years because we see ourselves in him, in the part that yearns for safety and yet feels the pull of adventure, in the struggle between duty and desire, in the wrestling match between the world outside and the one within. We see echoes of Odysseus today. In a soldier who returns from war changed in ways the family at home cannot yet see. In a refugee steering a fragile boat toward a distant shore. In anyone who has wandered far from who they were and tries to make the long way back. The hero's road is always a road of transformation. You leave as one person, you return as another, shaped by what you've endured, what you've lost, and what you've learned. The scars you carry are not just on your body but in the deepest chambers of your heart, where the person you once were still whispers of simpler times. But before we follow Odysseus over the wine-dark sea, we must first step into the world from which his story comes. It begins more than 1,000 years before the Common Era, at the height of the Bronze Age, when the eastern Mediterranean hummed with trade and the courts of kings stood glittering with bronze and gold. It was a world of palaces, fleets, and far-stretching alliances, and it was about to fall apart. Picture the Bronze Age at its zenith, massive citadels crown hilltops, their cyclopean walls built of stones so vast that later generations would claim only giants could have moved them. Within these fortresses, scribes bent over clay tablets, recording inventories of chariots and weapons, tribute from distant lands, the movements of fleets carrying amber from the Baltic, tin from Cornwall, ivory from Africa. Kings wore golden masks and carried silver-studded swords. Their queens adorned themselves with jewelry wrought in techniques so fine they would be lost for centuries. This was the world of Mycenae and Pylos, of Knossos and Troy. Trade routes stretched like arteries across the known world. Egyptian pharaohs corresponded with Hittite emperors. Merchants sailed from Cyprus to Sardinia, their holds heavy with copper ingots stamped with royal seals. In the palaces, bards sang of heroes who could wrestle with gods and emerge victorious. The world seemed solid, eternal, blessed by divine favor. Between 1200 and 1150 BC, that order collapsed with a finality that still takes the breath away. Cities were burned. Empires dissolved. Writing systems vanished from use. Trade routes snapped like rotting rope. The causes remained debated: shifts in climate that turned fertile lands to dust, earthquakes shaking coastal strongholds into the sea, invasions by unknown peoples who left no names behind, uprisings within as the governed turned against their governors. Perhaps it was all of these together, a perfect storm of catastrophe that no single power could weather. Whatever the reason, a long darkness settled over the region. The centuries that followed are called the Greek Dark Age, not because life ceased, but because the great lights of centralized civilization went out. Population dwindled. The art of writing was forgotten. The grand palaces crumbled into ruin, their treasures scattered, their very names lost to memory. In their place rose a simpler world of villages and petty chiefs, where survival mattered more than glory, where the greatest treasure was not gold but the knowledge of how to work iron. It was in that dark age that the memories of Troy were kept alive, not on tablets or in ink, but in the human voice. Songs about the war and what came after passed from singer to singer, campfire to campfire. Each telling shaped them anew. A warrior's deed grew grander with each recounting. A monster became more terrible. A homecoming more poignant. The stories absorbed the longings and fears of each generation that told them, becoming vessels not just for what had been, but for what people wished had been and feared might come again. When, In the 8th century BC, they were finally written down in the flowering Greek alphabet. The stories had already passed through generations of memory, carrying echoes of a lost golden age refracted through the lives of those who came after. The Odyssey stands at the hinge of history, set in the world of the Bronze Age but told in the time of rising city-states and the rebirth of writing, when the scattered Greek tribes were beginning to remember what it meant to build something greater than themselves. And then there is the question of Homer, if indeed there was one Homer. Tradition says he was a blind poet from Ionia, in what is now western Turkey. 7 cities claimed him: Smyrna, Rhodes, Colophon, Salamis, Chios, Argos, and Athens, each insisting that within their walls was born the voice that would outlast empires. His very name might come from a word meaning hostage, or follower. Perhaps he was a wanderer like his own Odysseus, moving from court to court with his songs. Some scholars suggest Homer was not one man but the voice of a tradition, the name given to a chorus of poets whose work was collected under one title. Others see in the epics the hand of a single genius, someone who took the scattered songs of centuries and wove them into something entirely new. The truth, like so much about the ancient world, remains tantalizingly beyond reach. What is certain is that whoever composed the Odyssey stood at the summit of an oral poetic tradition so rich that epics thousands of lines long could be composed, memorized, and performed without a written script. This was no mere rote memorization. The singers, called awidos, held in their minds a treasure house of stock phrases, images, and scenes. They knew rosy-fingered dawn would always herald the morning. They knew that ships were black, and the sea wine dark. They knew the beats of the story the way a skilled musician knows a tune, able to weave variations in the moment, while keeping the shape of the whole intact. These formulaic phrases were not crutches but tools of extraordinary sophistication. Each epithet carried weight and meaning. When Homer calls Odysseus Polytropos, the man of many turns, he invokes not just cleverness but adaptability, the quality that allows survival when strength fails. When Penelope becomes wise Penelope, or prudent Penelope, we understand that her virtue lies not in passive waiting but in active intelligence. When the Greek alphabet emerged in the 8th century, adapted from Phoenician script, these songs could finally be captured in written form. Whether it happened at the order of a ruler seeking to preserve the glorious past, or through the slow work of scribes recognizing something precious, the result was a turning point in human culture. Yet even in writing, the Odyssey still carries the sound of the sung word, the repeated epithets that gave singers time to think, the rhythm of its lines that helped audiences follow the story, the patterned scenes designed to lodge themselves in memory and emerge when called upon. And then there is the craft of the telling, which reveals a mind of extraordinary sophistication. Homer does not begin at the beginning, as a chronicler might. Instead, he drops us into the 7th year of Odysseus' captivity on Calypso's island, with our hero already transformed by all he has endured. The adventures before this, the Cyclops, the Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, we will hear later, from Odysseus' own mouth as he sits in the palace of the Phaeacians, tears streaming down his face as he relives each horror and wonder. The present action of the epic covers about 40 days, but in its frame it holds 10 years of wandering, 20 years of separation, and echoes that reach back to the very foundations of the world. Events and themes mirror each other with mathematical precision. Telemachus' voyage to seek news of his father reflects the homeward road of Odysseus. Acts of true hospitality abroad, the generosity of Nestor, the warmth of Menelaus and Helen, shine against the greedy violation of it at home, where the suitors gorge themselves on another man's wealth. The structure is as carefully built as the palace of Odysseus himself. Book follows book in carefully orchestrated counterpoint. The first 4 books belong to Telemachus, the next 4 to his father's release and journey to Phaeacia. The middle 4 contain Odysseus' own account of his wanderings. The final dozen chronicle the homecoming and its bloody aftermath. Within this grand design, smaller patterns repeat. The divine counsel that opens the epic is answered by another near its close. The contest of the bow echoes the games at Troy. Each act of hospitality, or its violation carries consequences that ripple through the generations. Odysseus is unlike the heroes of older tales, and Homer signals this from the very first lines. In the Iliad he is a respected warrior but not the strongest. That honor belongs to Achilles. He is not the most noble, that is Hector. He is not the most beautiful, that would be Paris. His genius lies elsewhere, in the labyrinthine pathways of the mind. It is he who thinks of the Trojan horse, victory by cunning rather than force, strategy rather than strength. Homer calls him the man of many turns, the man of many devices, the man of many wiles. In the fragile world after Troy, survival belongs not to the strongest arm but to the sharpest mind. Yet his brilliance has a sharp edge, and pride is his fatal flaw. When he blinds the Cyclops Polyphemus, he cannot resist the fatal moment of boasting. As his ship pulls away from the island, he shouts his name. I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, sacker of cities. In that shout, he earns the undying hatred of Poseidon, the Cyclops' divine father. It is a moment that will cost him 10 years of wandering and the lives of every man who sailed with him from Troy. This complexity makes Odysseus eternally fascinating. He is hero and trickster, loyal husband and occasional adulterer, loving father and ruthless killer. He weeps for his lost companions even as he leads new ones into danger. He lies as easily as he breathes, yet when he speaks truthfully, his words carry the weight of absolute sincerity. He is, in short, human in ways that Achilles and Hector never quite managed to be, capable of both transcendence and failure, often in the same breath. While Odysseus wanders the outer edges of the world, Ithaca rots from within. For 3 years, more than 100 young nobles from the surrounding islands have crowded into his hall, ostensibly to court Penelope but really to gorge themselves on his herds and wine. They slaughter his cattle, drain his storerooms, and turn his palace into a place of riot and waste. They mock the servants who remember their true master, threaten the life of Telemachus when he speaks against them, and strip the household of its accumulated wealth with the casual cruelty of locusts. The suitors represent everything corrupt about power without responsibility. They are young men who have inherited wealth without wisdom, strength without purpose. They take what they have not earned and destroy what they cannot replace. Their very presence is a violation of the sacred laws of hospitality that bind the Greek world together. Guests are meant to be welcomed and fed, but they are also meant to respect their host and depart when propriety demands. Instead, the suitors have made themselves permanent fixtures, turning the palace that should be the heart of order into a place of chaos. Without Odysseus, there is no one to enforce justice. Telemachus is young and untested, his voice carrying no weight in the assembly. The elders, who might have intervened, are powerless against so many young nobles backed by their families' wealth and retainers. The very structure of society depends on the presence of the king, and in his absence, everything begins to unravel. Penelope stands at the center of this storm, and her survival is perhaps the most remarkable feat in the entire epic. Without a husband or grown son to guard her, she must navigate between the Scylla of yielding to the suitors' demands and the Charybdis of defying them outright. Either choice could mean death for herself and her son. Instead, she chooses the narrow path between, yielding just enough to keep herself and Telemachus safe while resisting in ways the suitors cannot quite pin down. Her most famous stratagem is the shroud she weaves by day for her father-in-law Laertes and secretly unravels by night. For 3 years she maintains this deception, buying precious time while telling the suitors she cannot remarry until this sacred duty is complete. The trick reveals her character perfectly. She honors the old ways, caring for aging family members, while using that very traditionalism as a weapon against those who would destroy tradition entirely. But the shroud is only one of her devices. She promises the suitors answers that never quite come, sets conditions that seem reasonable but prove impossible to meet, and maintains a network of loyal servants who report to her everything that passes in her own hall. She is as much a strategist in her own domain as Odysseus is on the wine-dark sea, and like her husband, she survives through intelligence rather than strength. The parallel between husband and wife runs deep. Both are masters of concealment and revelation, showing different faces to different audiences. Both understand that sometimes the indirect approach succeeds where force fails. Both are sustained by a love that has survived 20 years of separation and doubt. When they finally reunite, it is not as strangers but as equals who have each fought their own version of the Trojan War and emerged victorious. Above all the human struggles, the gods watch and occasionally intervene. But these are not the distant, ineffable deities of later religions. They are personalities writ large, with their own desires, grudges, and favoritism. Athena, the gray-eyed goddess of wisdom, sees in Odysseus a mind like her own and works quietly on his behalf throughout his trials. She guides his son's first steps toward manhood, arranges his release from Calypso's island, and stands beside him in the final battle against the suitors. Poseidon, the earth-shaker, lord of the sea, hunts Odysseus in revenge for the blinding of his son Polyphemus. Every storm that batters the hero's ship, every wave that threatens to drag him down, carries the god's implacable anger. Yet even Poseidon's wrath has limits. He cannot kill Odysseus, for that would violate fate itself, but he can ensure that every mile of the journey home is earned through suffering. Zeus, the father of gods and men, maintains a careful balance. As lord of hospitality, he frowns on the suitor's violation of that sacred law. As upholder of justice, he sanctions the final reckoning that will restore order to Ithaca. Yet he also respects the claims of his brother Poseidon and allows Odysseus to suffer for his pride. The gods embody the same contradictions as mortals, driven by competing impulses of justice and personal feeling. Fate moves in the background like a river that has already chosen its course. Yet even Zeus admits that many disasters come from mortal folly rather than divine decree. The gods may set the parameters, but within those limits, human choice matters. Odysseus' cleverness saves him as often as divine intervention. Penelope's wisdom preserves her household when the gods are silent. The suitors choose their own destruction through their violations of sacred law. Homer begins not with the father, but with the son, and this choice reveals his understanding of how stories should unfold. Telemachus has grown up among the suitors' jeers, watching his inheritance shrink every day, powerless to prevent the slow destruction of everything his father built. At 20, he is still treated as a boy, dismissed and mocked whenever he tries to assert his authority. Then one evening, as the suitors carouse in the great hall, a stranger enters. Tall and commanding, with gray eyes that seem to see into the heart of things, the visitor asks for the hospitality that is any guest's right. Telemachus, displaying the courtesy his father would have shown, welcomes the stranger and provides food and drink. Only later does he learn that his guest was Athena in disguise, come to set him on the path to manhood. "You must not cling to childhood any longer," she tells him as they speak apart from the riotous suitors. "Look at yourself. You are tall and handsome. You are no longer a boy. It is time to learn what has become of your father, and if he is truly dead, to take your place as his heir." Her words kindle something in the young man's heart, not just hope, but the realization that he has been passive too long. The next morning, Telemachus calls an assembly of the island's elders, the first to be convened in the 20 years since Odysseus' departure. Standing before the men who knew his father, he speaks with a new voice, demanding that the suitors leave his house and court Penelope elsewhere if they truly seek marriage. The elders listen but offer no help. They are too old, too few, too set in their ways to challenge the young nobles who have made themselves masters of Ithaca. But the assembly serves its purpose. Telemachus has declared himself publicly, and more importantly, he has taken the first step toward claiming his inheritance. With Athena's guidance, she appears now as mentor, an old family friend. He gathers a small crew and sails for the mainland to seek news of his father from the veterans of Troy. At Pylos, Nestor the old king greets Telemachus with the welcome due any guest before even asking his name. "Sit, eat, be warm," the ancient warrior says, "and then tell us your story." This is the proper way: hospitality first, questions after. The hall fills with the smell of roasting meat and the sound of wine being poured, and only when the immediate needs of the body have been met does conversation turn to deeper matters. Nestor knows nothing of Odysseus' current fate, but he speaks lovingly of the man Telemachus barely remembers. "Your father was the wisest of all who fought at Troy," he tells the young man. "When we debated strategy in Agamemnon's tent, it was Odysseus' counsel we valued most." He could see 3 moves ahead when the rest of us were still puzzling out the first. The old king's words are balm to a son who has heard nothing but mockery of his absent father. From Pylos, Telemachus travels to Sparta, where Menelaus and Helen hold court in their palace of gold and silver. Here too he receives the courtesy that should be every guest's right, and here he encounters one of the most complex figures in all of Greek literature. Helen, whose beauty launched 1,000 ships and whose face brought down Troy, moves through her husband's hall with the grace of a goddess and the knowledge of one who has seen the very foundations of the world shake. She recognizes something in Telemachus before he speaks his name, the set of his shoulders, perhaps, or the way he holds his head. "This young man has the look of Odysseus about him," she says to her husband, and when Telemachus confirms his identity, both king and queen weep for the friend they fear is lost forever. But Menelaus has more to offer than tears. From the old man of the sea, the shape-shifting Proteus, he learns something that sends hope racing through Telemachus' heart. Odysseus is alive, trapped on an island by the nymph Calypso, but alive. The young man's journey has not been in vain. His father lives, and somewhere across the wine-dark sea, he too yearns for home. Meanwhile, on that distant island, Odysseus spends each day on the shore, looking toward the horizon and weeping. 7 years have passed since the wreck of his last ship cast him up on Calypso's beach, 7 years of comfort that has become a kind of torture. The nymph loves him truly, or as truly as an immortal can love a mortal, and offers him everything, eternal youth, perfect health, endless pleasure in her arms. But she cannot offer him what he wants most, the road home. Every morning he rises from her bed and walks to the headland where he can see farthest across the empty sea. There he sits on the rocks, salt spray mingling with the tears on his cheeks, and remembers Ithaca, the olive groves silver in the wind, the harbor where his ships once rode at anchor, the hall where Penelope waits. The memories are all he has left of the man he was before the war, before the wandering, before the gods decided to test him past all human endurance. Calypso watches from her cave, and her heart breaks a little more each day. She has offered him immortality, to live forever in paradise with a goddess who adores him, and he has refused. She cannot understand the longing that eats at him, the need that pulls stronger than any chain. To her, the mortal world is a place of suffering and death, and his desire to return to it seems like madness. When Hermes arrives with Zeus's command to release her captive, she rails against the double standard of the gods. "You do as you please with mortal women," she cries, "carrying them off whenever desire strikes you. But when a goddess loves a mortal man, when she saves him from drowning and offers him eternal life, then you bristle with indignation." Her words carry the bitter truth of divine hypocrisy, but they cannot change the will of Zeus. Yet when the moment comes, Calypso's love proves greater than her resentment. She helps Odysseus build a raft with her own hands, stocks it with provisions that would last a mortal crew for months, gives him the tools and knowledge he needs to navigate by the stars. Her last gift is a warning: Poseidon still hunts him, and the sea road home will demand everything he has left to give. 17 days into his voyage, the waters beneath his raft begin to heave and darken. Poseidon has returned from his visit to the blameless Ethiopians, and sees his enemy escaping at last toward home. The god's fury erupts in storm winds that turn the sea into chaos. Waves tall as mountains crash over the tiny craft, and the raft, so carefully built, comes apart like kindling in the god's hands. Odysseus finds himself alone in the maelstrom, clinging to a single beam as the sea tries to claim him. This is his ultimate test, not cunning now, but raw endurance, the will to keep breathing when every wave tries to fill his lungs with seawater. For 2 days and nights he battles the storm, kept afloat only by the sea goddess Ino's magic veil and his own refusal to surrender. When he finally glimpses the coast of Phaeacia, salvation seems within reach, until he sees the rocks. The same winds that have driven him to shore now threaten to dash him against the cliffs like a broken doll. He swims along the coast, searching desperately for a harbor, his strength ebbing with each stroke. Finally, he spots the mouth of a river and swims toward it with his last reserves of will. The river god takes pity on the half-dead hero and stills his waters, allowing Odysseus to crawl ashore more dead than alive. He drags himself under the olive trees and covers himself with leaves like a dying animal seeking shelter. Sleep takes him at last, the deep, healing sleep of one who has touched the very edge of death and somehow found his way back. He wakes to the sound of laughter and the bright voices of young women at play. Princess Nausicaa and her maidens have come to wash clothes in the river, and after their work is done, they play ball on the beach. When an errant throw sends the ball into the water, their cries wake the sleeping hero. Odysseus emerges from his shelter like some wild man of the forest, naked, crusted with salt, his hair matted with seaweed. The maidens flee in terror, all save Nausicaa, who stands her ground with the courage that marks true royalty. He approaches her with careful words, knowing that his life may depend on her mercy. "Princess," he says, falling to his knees in supplication, "I see in you the grace of Artemis herself. Whether you are goddess or mortal, I beg your aid. I have lost everything, my ships, my men, my very clothes, but I am of noble birth, and if the gods permit me to reach my home again, I will remember your kindness until my dying day." His words, carefully chosen, work their magic. Nausicaa sees past the wild exterior to the noble soul beneath and recognizes a hero in distress. She provides him with clothing and food, then guides him toward the city with instructions for approaching her parents. But she is also a young woman aware of her reputation, and she asks him to follow at a distance lest wagging tongues connect her name with a mysterious stranger's. In the palace of King Alcinous, Odysseus encounters a civilization that represents everything he has lost. The Phaeacians are masters of the sea, blessed by the gods with ships that sail by thought rather than wind. Their land knows no war, no want, no winter. It is, in many ways, what Ithaca might become if peace and prosperity could be guaranteed forever. The king and queen, Alcinous and Arete, welcome the stranger with the courtesy that has been so rare in his travels. They see his noble bearing beneath the borrowed clothes and offer him a place at their table without question. The bard Demodocus sings of the heroes of Troy, and tears stream down Odysseus' face as he hears his own deeds transformed into song. When the king notices his guest's emotion and asks his name, Odysseus can hide no longer. "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, known to all men for my stratagems," he says, "and my home is sunny Ithaca." Then, through the night hours, he tells the story of his wandering, not as it appeared to those who lived it in terror and confusion, but shaped by memory and the storyteller's art into something approaching meaning. His tale encompasses wonders and horrors in equal measure: the land of the Lotus Eaters where his men forgot their very names, the cave of the Cyclops where hubris nearly cost them everything, the island of Aeolus where the gift of favorable winds was wasted by his crew's distrust, the land of the Laestrygonians where giant cannibals destroyed 11 ships in a single, devastating attack. He speaks of Circe the enchantress, who turned his men into swine but then became their greatest ally, teaching him the dark road to the land of the dead. There, in the realm of shadows, he met the ghosts of his fallen comrades and the shade of his own mother, who died of grief waiting for his return. Her spirit slipped through his arms like smoke when he tried to embrace her, teaching him that some losses can never be undone. The Sirens sang to him of knowledge, all that was, all that is, all that ever shall be, but he resisted their deadly gift by stopping his crew's ears with wax and binding himself to his ship's mast. Through the strait guarded by Scylla and Charybdis he sailed, losing 6 men to the monster's hunger rather than risk his entire crew to the whirlpool's pull. And finally, on the island of the sun, his starving crew slaughtered the sacred cattle, bringing down Zeus's lightning and condemning them all. The Phaeacians, moved by his tale and recognizing in him a hero worthy of their aid, load their finest ship with treasures and carry him home as he sleeps. Their vessels are like no others. They sail by the will of their crews rather than the whim of wind and weather, and they deliver their passenger to Ithaca's shore in a single night. When Odysseus wakes on a beach shrouded in mist, he does not recognize his homeland at first. 20 years of absence have changed him, and Athena's magic makes the familiar seem strange. He assumes he has been deceived again, that the Phaeacians have abandoned him on some unknown shore. Only when the goddess appears and lifts the concealing veil does he understand, after 10 years of wandering, he is truly home. But home is not what it was. Athena warns him of the situation in his palace, the suitors' depredations, Penelope's plight, Telemachus' danger. She transforms him into an aged beggar, bent and gray, his own wife would not recognize, and sends him to the hut of Eumaeus the swineherd to learn how the land lies. Eumaeus, most faithful of servants, welcomes the seeming beggar with hospitality worthy of a king despite his own humble station. Here is the moral center that the palace has lost: genuine courtesy, honest work, loyalty that has survived 20 years of uncertainty. When Telemachus arrives, fresh from his journey to the mainland, Athena briefly lifts her disguise, and father and son embrace for the first time since the boy was an infant. Their reunion is both joyful and terrible. Telemachus weeps to see his father so worn by suffering, while Odysseus marvels at the man his son has become. Together they plan the destruction of the suitors, but it will require all their cunning and courage. They are 2 against more than 100, with only a handful of loyal servants to aid them. In the great hall of his own palace, still disguised as a beggar, Odysseus sees the full extent of the rot that has infected his kingdom. The suitors lounge in his father's chairs, drink his wine from cups that once graced royal tables, and treat his servants like slaves. Some of the household staff have thrown in their lot with the usurpers, hoping to share in their eventual victory. Others remain loyal but dare not show it openly. Penelope, making one of her rare appearances in the hall, feels something stir when she looks upon the strange beggar. She questions him about his travels, and his careful lies carry enough truth to make her wonder. Could this ragged stranger have news of her long-lost husband? She orders her servants to bathe him and provide clean clothing, but he refuses, claiming the humility of his station. Then comes her final stratagem, born of desperation and the growing pressure from the suitors' families to choose a new husband. She announces a contest. Whoever can string Odysseus' great bow and send an arrow through 12 axe heads set in a row will win her hand and the right to rule Ithaca. The bow hangs in the hall, untouched for 20 years, and she knows in her heart that only its true master can bend it. One by one the suitors try and fail. Some cannot even lift the bow, others strain until their faces turn red but cannot bend it enough to slip the string into place. They make excuses: the bow is old, the string too stiff, the task impossible for mortal man. But their failure reveals the truth: they are pretenders, every one, unworthy of the kingdom they seek to claim. The beggar asks quietly for a chance to try. The suitors mock him: what can this ancient vagabond do that they cannot? But Penelope, moved by some instinct she cannot name, orders that he be given the bow. Antinous, leader of the suitors, protests violently, but Telemachus supports his mother's will, and the weapon is placed in the stranger's hands. Odysseus examines the bow like a musician checking his lyre, running his fingers along its curves, testing its balance. Then, with an ease that silences the watching crowd, he strings it and draws it to his ear, listening to the sweet singing note of the taut string. The arrow flies straight and true, passing through all 12 axe heads with room to spare. The contest is won, but Odysseus is not finished. Without pausing, he fits another arrow to the string and sends it through Antinous' throat, cutting short the suitor's wine-drunk laugh. The hall erupts in chaos as the pretenders realize they face not a beggar but their rightful king returned. They reach for weapons that are not there. Odysseus and Telemachus have already secured the armory. What follows is not a battle but an execution. The suitors, who have lived like parasites on another man's wealth, die like the vermin they are. Odysseus' arrows find their marks with divine precision, and when his quiver is empty, he takes up spear and sword. Telemachus fights beside him, proving himself worthy of his noble blood, while Eumaeus the swineherd and Philoetius the cowherd guard the doors. Some of the suitors plead for mercy, offering to repay what they have stolen. But Odysseus has passed beyond forgiveness. These men threatened his son, tormented his wife, and perverted his home into a place of waste and riot. Justice demands their blood, and justice will have it. Only the bard Phemius is spared, for he sang under compulsion, and Medon the herald, who tried to protect Telemachus from the suitors' plots. When the slaughter is done, Odysseus orders the disloyal serving women to clean the blood from the hall, then hangs them from the courtyard trees like thrushes caught in a fowler's net. Their betrayal of his house has earned them a traitor's death. The loyal servants are rewarded, the bodies of the suitors sent back to their families, and order begins to return to the palace that has known only chaos for so long. But Penelope still waits upstairs, and she is not easily convinced. 20 years have taught her caution. She has survived by trusting no one completely, by testing every word and weighing every gesture. That a stranger could string her husband's bow proves skill, but it does not prove identity. Impostors can learn facts, acquire weapons, even master forgotten arts. Only she holds the key to the final test. When Euryclea, the old nurse who raised both Odysseus and Telemachus, rushes upstairs with news of the slaughter and her master's return, Penelope remains skeptical. "Old woman," she says gently, "grief has addled your wits. The man downstairs may be a hero, even a king, but he is not my husband. Odysseus died long ago in some distant land, and his bones lie bleaching under alien stars. But doubt gnaws at her certainty. She descends to the great hall, now cleansed of blood and bodies, and studies the man who claims to be her husband. He has bathed and dressed in royal robes, and Athena has restored something of his former majesty. Yet 20 years have carved deep lines in his face, and his hair, once dark as a raven's wing, is touched with silver. Could this weathered stranger truly be the young king who sailed away to Troy? Odysseus watches her with eyes that know her every mood, her every gesture. He sees the wariness in her posture, the careful distance she maintains, and his heart breaks a little. She is testing him as he has tested others throughout his journey. It is what he would do in her place, what he has taught her to do through 20 years of separation. But knowing the necessity does not make the suspicion less painful. "Penelope," he says softly, and something in his voice makes her start. It is not just the sound but the way he shapes her name, the particular tenderness that no other man has ever managed. "I know I have changed. The years have not been kind to either of us. But surely you can see your husband in this scarred and weary man?" She moves closer, studying his face like a scholar examining an ancient text. Her fingers trace the scar above his left eyebrow, where a boar's tusk caught him in his youth. She notes the particular way his mouth quirks when he is thinking, the habit he has of running his thumb across his knuckles when he is anxious. These are things an impostor might learn, but could he learn to wear them so naturally? Still, she is not satisfied. Penelope has one more test, the final proof that will admit no doubt. "Come," she says to her servants, "prepare our bed for my husband. Move it from our chamber so he may rest after his long travels." Odysseus reacts as if she had struck him. "Move our bed?" he cries, his composure cracking for the first time since his return. "What man could move that bed? I built it myself, with these hands, around a living olive tree. I chose the spot where the trunk grew strongest and straightest, cut away the branches, and built our chamber around it. The bedpost is the tree itself, rooted in Ithacan soil and growing still. No man can move that bed unless he cuts down the tree, and if any man has dared to touch it." His voice breaks with emotion. Only then does Penelope's careful control desert her. She runs to him, tears streaming down her face, and takes him in her arms at last. "Odysseus! My husband! Forgive me for testing you, but I had to be certain. Too many years have passed, too many sorrows have fallen between us. I feared that some god had sent me a beautiful lie to torment me with false hope." They hold each other in the hall where he dealt justice to their enemies, 20 years of separation collapsing into a single moment of recognition. She is no longer the young bride he left behind, and he is no longer the confident king who sailed for Troy. They are both scarred by the years, worn by waiting and wandering. But they are still themselves, still the two souls who chose each other when the world was young. Athena, taking pity on the reunited couple, holds back the dawn to give them time for all that must be said. In their chamber, with the olive tree bedpost standing witness, they share the stories of their separate ordeals. Odysseus tells of monsters and enchantresses, of gods and storms and the endless ache of homesickness. Penelope speaks of the suitor's siege, of her daily battle to preserve what he had built, of nights spent wondering if she was a wife or a widow. They map the changes the years have wrought in each other, new scars, new strengths, new depths of endurance they had never known they possessed. The young couple who parted at Troy's beginning could not have survived what faced them. Only the people they became through suffering could have found their way back to each other. "We are not the same," Penelope says, her head on his shoulder as dawn finally breaks over Ithaca. "The gods have tested us both past all normal endurance. I sometimes wonder if we can truly be happy now, after all that has passed." "We are not the same," Odysseus agrees, "but we are still ours. The love that sent me across the wine-dark sea, that kept you faithful through 20 years of uncertainty, that has not changed. We have been refined by fire, you and I, and what remains is stronger than what we were. Yet even reunion cannot solve all problems." The families of the dead suitors seek vengeance, gathering their retainers and marching on the palace. Odysseus, Telemachus, and old Laertes, 3 generations of the royal house, stand ready to fight again. But Athena intervenes, appearing in the form of Mentor to broker peace. Enough blood has been spilled. The cycle of vengeance must end, or Ithaca will tear itself apart. The goddess strikes both sides with divine forgetfulness of their grievances. The families of the suitors forget their anger as if waking from a dark dream. Odysseus sheathes his sword and becomes a king of peace rather than war. The island that has known only chaos begins to heal, its rightful order restored at last. But the Odyssey's truest wisdom lies not in the restoration of political order, but in its understanding of what home really means. When Odysseus first sets foot on Ithaca's shore, he does not recognize it. 20 years of wandering have changed not just the land but his ability to see it clearly. Home, the poem suggests, is not simply a place you return to, it is a place you must rediscover and remake. The Ithaca that Odysseus left was the domain of a young king flush with confidence, secure in his place and power. The Ithaca he reclaims is darker, more complicated, marked by betrayal and blood. He cannot simply resume his old life as if nothing has happened. He must forge a new relationship with his kingdom, his family, and himself. This is perhaps why Homer ends not with the slaughter of the suitors but with the quiet recognition between husband and wife. The true homecoming is not the recovery of possessions or position but the rediscovery of love. When Penelope finally accepts that this scarred wanderer is truly her husband, when Odysseus realizes that she has become someone worthy of his 20 years of struggle, they achieve something more precious than the mere restoration of the past. The olive tree around which their bed is built serves as the perfect symbol. It is rooted in Ithacan soil, it belongs to this place and no other. But it is also alive, growing, changing with each passing season. It represents continuity and change, permanence and adaptation. Like a true marriage, like a true home, it endures not by remaining static but by growing stronger through time. The Odyssey endures not because it is an adventure story, though it contains adventures enough for a dozen tales. It endures not because it is a love story, though the love between Odysseus and Penelope has moved readers for 3 millennia. It endures because it is the story of what it means to be human in a world that seems determined to strip away everything that makes us who we are. Every generation has found its own Odysseus in Homer's hero. Medieval Christians saw in him the soul's journey toward God. Renaissance humanists saw the triumph of learning over ignorance. Modern readers have seen the soldier returning from war, the exile seeking a homeland, the artist struggling to create meaning from chaos. Each age discovers new depths in the ancient story because the fundamental questions it asks: who am I? Where do I belong? How do I find my way home? Are eternal. The poem's structure mirrors its theme of return and recognition. Events echo and reflect each other like light bouncing between mirrors. Telemachus' journey to find news of his father prepares us for Odysseus' journey to find himself. The false homecomings, with Calypso, with the Phaeacians, make the true homecoming more precious. The suitor's violation of hospitality throws into sharp relief the genuine kindness Odysseus receives from strangers like Eumaeus and Nausicaa. Even the gods follow this pattern of departure and return. Athena's protection of Odysseus and Telemachus represents divine order reasserting itself after a period of chaos. Poseidon's persecution of the hero must eventually yield to the larger purposes of fate. Zeus's final intervention to end the cycle of vengeance shows justice tempered by mercy. In the end, the Odyssey is about the power of stories themselves. Odysseus survives not just through strength or cunning but through his ability to shape his experiences into narrative. When he tells the Phaeacians of his wanderings, he transforms random suffering into meaningful quest. When he reveals himself to Penelope, he proves his identity not through any physical token but through shared knowledge of their story. The bards who appear throughout the epic, Phemius in Odysseus's hall, Demodocus in the palace of the Phaeacians, represent the poet's own role in keeping the past alive. They are the keepers of cultural memory, the ones who ensure that the lessons of heroes are not lost. In a world before writing, there were the libraries and historians, the entertainers and moral teachers. Homer's genius was to understand that the greatest stories are not about gods or monsters but about the human heart in all its complexity. Odysseus weeps when he hears the bards sing of Troy because he recognizes his own story transformed into something larger than his individual experience. It has become part of the great web of human narrative, the endless conversation between past and present that makes us who we are. 3,000 years after Homer first sang of the man of many turnings, we still hear echoes of his voice. In every story of exile and return, of love tested by time, of home lost and found, the Odyssey lives again. The wine-dark sea still calls to us, and somewhere on its far shores, home waits, not as we left it, but as we need it to be, transformed by the journey that brings us back to ourselves. After 20 years, Odysseus has come home. But neither he nor Ithaca is what it was. The Odyssey endures because it is not only about arriving at a place, but about returning to yourself, and finding that both you and home have been remade by the journey. In that remaking, in that recognition of how suffering can become wisdom, and wandering can become arrival, lies the eternal power of the greatest story ever told about the long road home.